The wind that night was sharp enough to cut through any kind of clothing. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the air before landing on the frozen road, where they melted into dirty slush under the weak glow of the streetlights. The streets were almost empty except for the occasional car rushing home, engines humming in the distance. On that cold night, a young man named Ethan walked slowly along the sidewalk, his shoulders hunched, his hands buried deep in his jacket pockets. His jacket was thin and faded with a small tear near the zipper. It was the only one he owned, and though it barely kept out the cold, he wore it proudly. He had bought it from a thrift store 2 winters ago. Ethan had just finished his late shift at a small diner on the edge of town. The place smelled of grease and coffee, and he didn't mind it. Work was work. He wiped tables, washed dishes, and sometimes helped serve when it got busy. It wasn't much, but it paid for groceries and part of his mother's medicine. The diner closed at midnight, and by the time he walked out, the roads were already slick with snow. The cold air hit his face, making his skin sting. He took a deep breath, saw his breath fog up in front of him, and started his long walk home. Ethan didn't have a car. He couldn't afford one. He used to take the bus, but after the company changed routes, he found himself walking more often than not. It was a long way home, almost an hour on foot, but he didn't complain. It gave him time to think. He thought about his mother. She had been sick for a while, and the bills never seemed to end. He tried not to let her see how tired he was, but she always knew. She'd smile at him when he got home, even though she could barely get out of bed some days. "You're my little soldier," she used to tell him, her voice gentle but full of pride. The snow crunched under his shoes as he walked past empty houses with glowing windows. Sometimes he imagined what life was like inside those homes. Families sitting together near a warm fire, kids laughing, a table full of food. He never envied them. He just wished one day he could give his mother that kind of comfort. His hands were numb now, and he rubbed them together to keep them warm. The street was quiet except for the sound of the wind whistling through the bare branches. He lowered his head and kept walking, counting the blocks left before home. Then, out of nowhere, he saw a faint flicker of red light ahead. At first, he thought it was a traffic signal, but as he got closer, he realized it was the hazard lights of a car pulled over to the side of the road. Steam was rising from under the hood. Glowing faintly in the darkness, Ethan slowed down. He could make out the shape of an older car, maybe 15, 20 years old. The driver's door opened, and an elderly man stepped out, wrapping his coat tightly around himself. He looked confused and frustrated, peering under the hood as if trying to figure out what had gone wrong. For a moment, Ethan hesitated. His body screamed for him to keep walking. He was freezing, hungry, and still had miles to go. Helping would mean losing more time, maybe even missing the last bit of heat his small apartment still held. But he couldn't ignore it. Ethan wasn't the kind of person who could walk past someone in trouble. He remembered all the times strangers had helped him and his mother. A neighbor who shared food when they had none. A teacher who paid for his school books. A nurse who slipped them free medication once when they couldn't afford it. Little things, but they meant the world. So he sighed, pulled his jacket tighter, and stepped off the sidewalk toward the car. The old man looked up as Ethan approached. His face was lined with age, his hair thin and gray. He looked worried but tried to smile. "Evening, sir," Ethan said, his voice shaking from the cold. "Car trouble?" The man nodded. "Seems so. It just stopped running. Won't start again. I think it's the battery or maybe the engine's frozen. I tried calling for help, but my phone died." Ethan could see the man's hands trembling, not just from frustration but from the biting cold. "Well," Ethan said, glancing at the steaming hood, "I'm no mechanic, but maybe I can take a look." The old man hesitated. "You sure? It's freezing out here. You'll catch your death." Ethan smiled faintly. "I'm already halfway there." That made the man chuckle, and for a moment the tension broke. Ethan rolled up his sleeves, opened the hood fully, and was greeted by a puff of white steam. He coughed, waved it away, and leaned in to inspect the engine. He didn't know much about cars, but he'd helped fix a few at the diner parking lot with his coworker, who loved old vehicles. Sometimes Ethan would stay late, watching and learning just for the sake of curiosity. He checked the cables first. The battery looked old, and one of the terminals was loose. He tightened it using a small wrench he found in the car's trunk toolkit. Then he cleaned off some corrosion with a rag, rubbing until his fingers burned from the cold. After about 15 minutes, he asked the old man to try starting the engine again. The man climbed inside, turned the key, and the car made a coughing sound before dying again. Ethan didn't give up. "Let me try something else," he said. He adjusted a few more cables, tapped the battery gently, then stepped back. "Okay, one more time." The man tried again. This time the engine sputtered and then roared to life, coughing out a bit of smoke before settling into a steady hum. Ethan smiled and clapped his hands together to shake off the snow. "There we go," he said, relief in his voice. The old man got out of the car, his face lighting up with gratitude. "You did it." "I can't believe it. I've been sitting here for almost an hour." Ethan shrugged, embarrassed. "Just got lucky, I guess." The man reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. "Please take something for your trouble. You shouldn't have to freeze for free." But Ethan quickly shook his head. "No, sir. You don't have to do that. I was just passing by." The man looked surprised. "Are you sure? You've helped me more than you know." "I'm sure," Ethan said with a small smile. "Just glad I could help. Drive safe, all right?" The man looked at him for a long moment as if studying him. There was something kind in his eyes, something that felt deeper than simple gratitude. "You're a good young man," he said softly. "Not many would stop these days." Ethan gave a modest shrug. "I guess we could all use a little help sometimes." With that, he stepped back onto the sidewalk, waving goodbye as the car slowly drove off into the snowy darkness. The red taillights faded until they disappeared behind a turn. Ethan stood there for a moment, watching the road. Then he turned and continued walking, his breath coming out in short clouds. His fingers ached, his toes were numb, and his face burned from the cold, but inside he felt warm. He didn't know who the man was or what kind of life he lived. He didn't expect to ever see him again. But for some reason, that small act of kindness made the night feel less cruel. When he finally reached his neighborhood, most of the lights were off. His apartment building stood at the corner, old and peeling, but it was home. He climbed the stairs quietly, trying not to wake the neighbors, and unlocked the door. Inside, the air was cold, but the faint smell of soup hung in the air. His mother was asleep on the couch, a blanket pulled up to her chin. The small heater beside her gave off a soft hum. Ethan smiled as he looked at her. He hung his jacket on the chair, rubbed his hands together, and tiptoed to her side. He adjusted the blanket so she wouldn't get cold and whispered, "I'm home, Mom." She stirred slightly but didn't wake. Her breathing was slow and peaceful. Ethan sat down on the old armchair across the room. His body ached, but his heart was light. He thought about the man on the road, the look of gratitude in his eyes, the smile that seemed to mean more than words. He didn't know it then. But that single moment of kindness would soon change everything about his life. For now, though, all he cared about was that his mother was safe and warm, and the world outside, even if harsh and cold, still had a place for small miracles. He closed his eyes, listening to the hum of the heater and the wind outside, and drifted off to sleep, unaware that somewhere out there, the old man he helped was still thinking about him too. The next morning, pale sunlight slipped through the cracks in the curtains, casting faint stripes of gold across the small apartment. The heater had gone silent sometime during the night, and the air inside felt cold enough to see your breath. Ethan rubbed his hands together before pulling the blanket off himself. His back ached from sleeping on the chair again, but that wasn't new. He looked over at the couch where his mother still slept, her breathing steady. A small smile crossed his face. He got up quietly and made his way to the tiny kitchen. There wasn't much there. Half a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a few instant soup packets. He grabbed the bread and made toast using the small pan on the stove. The smell of warm bread filled the air, simple but comforting. As he buttered the slices, his mother stirred awake. "You're up early," she said softly, her voice tired but warm. "I wanted to get breakfast going before work," he replied. "Did you sleep okay?" She nodded and smiled faintly. "You worry too much," Ethan chuckled. "Someone has to." He handed her a slice of toast and sat beside her. They ate quietly for a few minutes. Outside, the world was still gray and cold. Snow piled up on the sidewalks. Cars passed every now and then, tires crunching on the ice. After finishing his toast, Ethan stood and grabbed his work bag. "I'll stop by the pharmacy after my shift. The doctor said they might have your new prescription ready." "You don't have to rush," she said gently. "You've been doing too much already," he smiled. "Don't worry. I've got it handled." He put on his jacket, wrapped a scarf around his neck, and stepped outside. The wind hit his face instantly, making his eyes water. He pulled his collar higher and started walking to the diner. The roads were slick, but he moved quickly, his mind already on the day ahead. His boss, Mrs. Turner, wasn't the easiest person to work for. She barked orders and had no patience for mistakes. But she always paid on time, and that was what mattered most. When he reached the diner, the open sign was already glowing red. He pushed the door open, greeted by the smell of coffee, bacon, and frying eggs. The sound of dishes clattering filled the air. "Morning, Ethan," called out one of his co-workers, a tall guy named Luis who worked the grill. "You look like you slept in a freezer." Ethan laughed. "Feels like it too." He put on his apron and got to work wiping down the tables. The morning rush started slow, mostly truck drivers and a few regulars from the neighborhood. He liked the calm hours, the quiet moments before the chaos. As he cleaned, he thought about the old man from last night. The man's voice, the way his face lit up when the car started, it all replayed in Ethan's mind. There was something about him that stuck. Maybe it was the gratitude in his eyes, or maybe just how gentle he'd been. "Earth to Ethan," Luis said, snapping his fingers. "You daydreaming again?" Ethan blinked and laughed. "Sorry, just thinking about something that happened last night." "Oh yeah? What happened?" Ethan told him about the broken-down car and the old man stranded on the road. Luis shook his head with a grin. "Man, only you would stop to help in weather like that. You're too nice for your own good." "Maybe," Ethan said with a shrug, "but I couldn't just walk past him." "Still," Luis said, flipping an omelet. "Hope he at least gave you something for the trouble." He offered, Ethan admitted, "But I said no." Luis gave him a look. "You're crazy. I'd have taken it in a heartbeat." Ethan smiled. "It wasn't about the money." Luis shook his head. "You're one of a kind, man." The day went on as usual. The lunch rush came and went, the sound of chatter and laughter filling the diner. Ethan kept moving, taking orders, clearing tables, running dishes back and forth. He didn't mind the work. There was something honest about it, tiring but real. By the time his shift ended, his feet were sore and his hands smelled faintly of soap and coffee. He clocked out, said goodbye to his co-workers, and stepped back into the cold evening. The snow had started again, soft flakes drifting from the sky. Streetlights flickered on, casting warm halos through the falling snow. Ethan pulled his scarf tighter and started walking home. He passed the same stretch of road where he'd found the old man the night before. The spot was empty now, just tire marks half buried under new snow. He stopped for a moment, staring at it, lost in thought. He didn't know why he kept thinking about it. Maybe because it was rare to meet someone who looked at him like that, with real kindness, like he mattered. When he finally got home, his mother was sitting up on the couch, knitting a scarf with worn but steady hands. She looked up as he entered. "How was work?" "Busy," he said, smiling as he hung up his jacket. "But good." She nodded and went back to her knitting. "Did you stop by the pharmacy?" "Yeah," he said, pulling a small bag from his pocket. They had it ready. "And don't worry, I used the discount card." She smiled gratefully. "Thank you, sweetheart." They spent the evening quietly. Ethan cooked a small pot of soup and they ate together, talking about small things, the weather, the neighborhood, the news. Later, after his mother went to bed, Ethan sat by the window watching the snow fall. He thought again about the man he'd helped. He wondered if he made it home safely, if his car was still running. It was a small thing, but for some reason he couldn't shake it. Maybe it was because he'd seen something familiar in that man's eyes. Loneliness, maybe. Or maybe just humanity. He sighed and leaned back in his chair, his breath fogging the window glass. Tomorrow would be another long day, another chance to keep pushing forward. That's all he could do, keep going. 2 days passed quietly. Ethan worked, cared for his mother, and tried not to think too much about things he couldn't change. Life was simple, even if it was hard. But then on the third day, something unexpected happened. It was just after lunch when a black car pulled up outside the diner. It wasn't like the usual cars that parked there. This one was sleek, shiny, and clearly expensive, the kind of car people didn't see much around that part of town. Ethan was wiping a table near the window when he noticed it. He didn't pay much attention at first, figuring it was someone lost or passing through, but then he saw a familiar face step out, the elderly man from the other night. Ethan froze for a second, unsure if he was imagining it. The man was dressed differently this time. Warm coat, polished shoes, gloves that probably cost more than Ethan made in a month. He wasn't alone either. A driver stood by the car holding the door open. The man looked around, then spotted Ethan through the window. A smile spread across his face. Ethan felt his stomach twist with surprise. What was he doing here? The man pushed open the diner door and the bell above it jingled softly. The few customers inside glanced up, curious. He walked straight toward Ethan, his steps slow but confident. "There you are," the man said warmly. "I was hoping I'd find you." Ethan blinked, still stunned. "Sir? I didn't think I'd see you again." "I wanted to see you," the man said. "You helped me when I needed it most. I didn't even get your name." "It's Ethan," he said, wiping his hands on his apron nervously. "Well, Ethan," the man said with a kind smile, "I've been thinking about that night a lot. You could have just walked by, but you didn't. You stopped in that freezing cold and you helped a stranger. That kind of kindness. It's rare." Ethan felt his face grow warm. "I just did what anyone would do," the man chuckled. "I'm not so sure about that." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small card. "I'd like you to come see me. I owe you more than a simple thank you." Ethan hesitated, glancing down at the card. It was white with gold letters embossed on it. He read the name Harold Wallace and underneath it the words Wallace Automotive Group. His heart skipped a beat. He'd heard that name before. Wallace Automotive was one of the biggest companies in the country. "Sir, Ethan began, but the man raised a hand gently. "Please, call me Harold. I insist you visit. You can bring your mother if you'd like." He smiled warmly. "Don't worry, it's nothing bad, just something I'd like to talk to you about." And with that, he placed the card on the table, tipped his hat politely, and left as quietly as he'd come. The black car drove away, its tires crunching softly on the snow. Ethan stood there for a long moment, staring at the card in his hand, his mind racing. What could a man like that possibly want from someone like him? He didn't know it yet, but the answer would change his life in ways he could never have imagined. Ethan stood behind the counter, staring at the white card the man had left. The gold letters gleamed under the diner's dim light, looking out of place against the worn countertop. He read the name again and again, Harold Wallace, just to be sure his eyes weren't playing tricks on him. Wallace Automotive. That name carried weight. Everyone had heard of it. They made cars, trucks, engines, everything. People called Harold Wallace a genius, a self-made man who had started with nothing and built an empire. Ethan swallowed hard. He couldn't wrap his head around it. The man he'd helped on the roadside, the one who'd been stranded in the cold, helpless, with steam pouring from his old car. Was that Harold Wallace? A billionaire? It didn't make sense. The man hadn't looked rich that night. His car wasn't fancy, his coat was worn, and his shoes had salt stains on them. But the way he spoke, the calmness in his voice, maybe that had been the real sign. "Ethan, you good?" Luis asked from the grill, wiping his hands on a towel. Ethan blinked and quickly slipped the card into his pocket. "Yeah," he said quietly, "just thinking." "You look like you've seen a ghost," Luis said, half joking. "Something like that," Ethan replied. The rest of his shift felt like a blur. His thoughts kept drifting back to the man, the car, the smile, and now the invitation. What could a man like Harold Wallace possibly want with someone like him? By the time the diner closed, Ethan's nerves were buzzing. He walked home through the cold night, the card feeling heavy in his pocket. The snow had stopped, and the streets were quiet except for the sound of his boots crunching on the frozen ground. When he reached his apartment, he found his mother awake, sitting near the window, a blanket around her shoulders. She smiled when she saw him come in. "You're late tonight." "Yeah," he said, closing the door and taking off his jacket. "Work ran over a little." She tilted her head, studying his face. "You look troubled. Everything all right?" He hesitated, unsure how to explain it. Finally, he sat down beside her and pulled the card from his pocket. "You remember I told you about that old man I helped the other night?" She nodded. "Of course. You said his car broke down?" "Yeah. Well, he came to the diner today." Her eyes widened slightly. "Really? That's surprising. He said he wanted to thank me properly. Gave me this." Ethan handed her the card. She took it carefully, adjusting her glasses to read it. When she saw the name, her eyes lifted in disbelief. "Harold Wallace?" "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "The same one who owns Wallace Automotive." She blinked, her voice soft. Ethan, that's incredible. I don't get it, he said. Why would a man like that care about me? I just helped him fix his car. She smiled faintly. Maybe because kindness still matters no matter how rich you are. He looked down, thinking about her words. Maybe she was right. Still, something about it felt unreal. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the heater humming weakly beside him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that card. He imagined meeting the man again, sitting in some big office surrounded by glass and leather chairs. What would he even say? By morning, he had made up his mind. He would go. Even if it was nothing, even if it led nowhere, he needed to see for himself. He told his boss he needed a few hours off and took an early bus into the city. The ride was long and bumpy and his hands fidgeted the whole way. The card had an address on it, an office building downtown, one of those sleek towers that seemed to touch the clouds. When he finally stepped off the bus, he found himself standing in front of it. The building was massive, all glass and steel, shining under the winter sun. People in suits hurried in and out carrying briefcases, their shoes clicking sharply on the pavement. Ethan hesitated at the entrance, suddenly feeling out of place. His jacket was patched, his shoes were scuffed, and his jeans had seen better days. He looked at his reflection in the glass doors and took a deep breath. All right, he muttered to himself. You helped the man. You've got nothing to be ashamed of. He walked in. The lobby was enormous, polished floors gleaming like mirrors. A receptionist sat behind a long desk, smiling politely as he approached. Good morning, she said. How can I help you? Ethan pulled out the card and held it up. I was asked to meet Mr. Harold Wallace. The receptionist's eyes flicked to the card, then back to him. For a second, she seemed surprised, but her smile didn't fade. Of course. One moment, please. She made a quick call, then nodded. Mr. Wallace is expecting you. Take the elevator to the 20th floor. Ethan nodded, murmured a thank you, and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, his heart thudded in his chest. When the elevator dinged and opened, he found himself in a quiet hallway lined with framed photographs, old pictures of cars, factories, and workers. At the end of the hall was a set of glass doors with gold lettering that read, Harold Wallace, founder and CEO. He took another deep breath and knocked gently. Come in, a familiar voice called. Ethan pushed open the door. The office was large but warm. Bookshelves lined one wall and a big window looked out over the city skyline. Behind the desk sat the same man from that freezing night, though he looked different now, confident, calm, and full of quiet authority. Ethan, the man said with a genuine smile. I'm glad you came. Ethan nodded awkwardly. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Harold said, standing and gesturing toward a chair. Please sit. Ethan sat down, feeling nervous. His hands rested on his knees and his eyes darted around the room. I owe you a proper thank you, Harold began. That night I was on my way back from visiting an old factory site. The car broke down in the middle of nowhere, my phone had died, and the cold was setting in fast. If you hadn't stopped. He paused and smiled. Well, I might have been there all night. Ethan shook his head. Anyone would have helped, Harold chuckled. I'm not sure about that. You didn't know me. You didn't ask for anything. You just helped. That says something about your character. Ethan felt his face warm. I just try to do the right thing. That's exactly what more people should do, Harold said. He leaned forward slightly. Tell me about yourself, Ethan. What do you do? Ethan hesitated. I work at a diner. Mostly cleaning, sometimes serving. And before that? Not much, Ethan said. I finished high school, then started working. My mom's sick, so I help take care of her. Harold's expression softened. That's a lot for someone your age. Ethan shrugged. You do what you have to. Harold nodded slowly, studying him. Do you like working with cars? You seem to know what you were doing that night. Ethan smiled faintly. A little. I've always liked machines. When I was a kid, I used to take apart old radios just to see how they worked. I guess I've always been curious about how things fit together. Harold's eyes lit up with interest. Curiosity is a good thing. It's how most of us start. He stood and walked over to a framed photo on the wall, a much younger version of himself, standing beside an old car. When I was your age, I was fixing engines in a shed behind my house. I had grease under my nails and holes in my shoes, but I loved every minute of it. Ethan listened quietly, his nervousness fading a little. Harold turned back toward him. How would you like a chance to learn more about it? Ethan blinked. What do you mean? I run a technical training program for young people who want to learn automotive engineering. It's a scholarship, covers tuition, housing, everything. It's for those who have the drive but not the means. He smiled kindly. You'd be perfect for it. Ethan stared at him, stunned. Sir, I don't know what to say. Say yes, Harold said simply. Think about it as an investment, not just in you, but in the kind of person this world needs more of. Ethan's throat tightened. I don't know if I deserve something like that. Harold's eyes softened. You do. You earned it the moment you stopped on that freezing road. Silence filled the room for a moment. Then Ethan nodded slowly, his voice quiet but firm. I'll do it. Harold smiled wide. Good. I'll have my assistant arrange everything. You'll start next week. Ethan stood, still in disbelief. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. I know you won't, Harold said. He walked him to the door. And call me Harold, please. When Ethan stepped back into the cold afternoon air, the city felt different somehow. The people, the noise, even the cold, all of it seemed alive with new possibility. He looked up at the tall building behind him, the glass gleaming in the winter light, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. As he walked toward the bus stop, a small smile crept across his face. He didn't have much in his pockets, but for the first time in years, he felt rich in something far more valuable than money, and somewhere high above. In that tall glass office, Harold Wallace stood by the window, watching the young man disappear into the city crowd with a knowing smile. He had seen something special in that boy, a spark he recognized from his own youth, and he knew, deep down, this was only the beginning of a much bigger story. The next few days passed like a dream for Ethan. He still went to work at the diner, still took care of his mother, still walked through the cold streets every night. But something inside him had changed. For the first time in a long while, he felt like life was moving forward, like something good was finally waiting for him just around the corner. When he told his mother about the scholarship offer, she was quiet for a long time. Her eyes filled with tears, but her smile was soft and proud. You see, she said, good things come to people who keep doing good. I always knew you were meant for something more. Ethan held her hand. I couldn't have done any of this without you, Mom. She laughed lightly. Maybe not, but you did it with your own heart. You've always been that way, even as a boy. The night before his first day at the training center, Ethan barely slept. He packed and repacked his small bag, making sure he had everything ready. His worn notebook, a few shirts, an old pen his mother had given him when he graduated high school. It wasn't much, but it was his. He lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what was waiting for him. A new place, new faces, a chance to finally learn something that could change his life. He was excited, but he was also scared. What if he wasn't good enough? What if he didn't fit in? When morning came, he kissed his mother goodbye and promised to call every day. She hugged him tight, whispering, just be yourself. That's all you need to do. The training center was about an hour outside the city. It was part of a large facility owned by Wallace Automotive, surrounded by workshops, classrooms, and testing garages filled with engines, tools, and half-built cars. When Ethan arrived, he was amazed. The place was huge, nothing like the diner or the small streets he knew. He could smell oil and metal in the air, hear the clatter of tools, the hum of engines. It was alive with energy. A kind woman at the front desk showed him to his dorm room. It was small but clean, with a single bed, a desk, and a view of the workshop yard below. For someone who had grown up with very little, it felt like luxury. That first week was tough. The classes were long, the lessons complicated, and Ethan often felt behind. Most of the other students came from better schools, had better clothes, and seemed to know more about machines than he did. Sometimes he caught them glancing at his old jacket or the holes in his shoes. But Ethan didn't care. He was there to learn. He listened carefully, asked questions, and stayed late after class to practice what he'd learned. He struggled at first. His hands fumbled. His notes were messy, but every mistake pushed him to try harder. When something finally worked, when an engine he repaired came to life with a loud roar, he felt a rush of pride that erased all the doubt inside him. One evening, while he was still in the workshop after everyone else had left, he heard a voice behind him. You're here late again. Ethan turned and saw Harold Wallace standing in the doorway, his coat draped over one arm, a small smile on his face. Ethan wiped his hands quickly. I was just... finishing up. Didn't want to leave this half done. Harold stepped closer, looking at the engine on the workbench. You've made good progress. You're a fast learner. Still a lot I don't know, Ethan said, embarrassed. Harold chuckled. That's true for all of us. Even after 50 years, I still learn something new every day. Ethan smiled. I guess that's what keeps it interesting. Harold nodded approvingly. Exactly. Curiosity, that's what drives success. Not just in machines, but in life. For a while, they stood there in comfortable silence, the sound of wind rattling softly against the windows. Then Harold turned to him and said, You remind me of myself when I was your age. Ethan looked surprised. Me? No way. You built an empire. I'm just trying to make it through the week. Harold smiled, his eyes distant. When I started, I had nothing but an old toolbox and a stubborn belief that I could do better. People laughed at me. They said I was dreaming too big. But dreams are only foolish to those who stop chasing them. Ethan listened closely. There was something about Harold's tone, calm but full of meaning, that stuck with him. Do you ever miss it? Ethan asked quietly. The beginning, I mean. When everything was small? Harold chuckled softly. Every single day. Back then, every success felt like magic. Now everything's bigger, faster, louder, but those first moments, they stay with you. Ethan nodded slowly. I get that. Before leaving, Harold placed a hand on his shoulder. Keep going, Ethan. I can see something in you. Don't let fear or doubt take that away. After that night, Ethan worked harder than ever. He stayed late almost every day, pushing himself to learn more, to do better. Slowly, the instructors started to notice. He began to help others who were struggling, showing them small tricks he'd learned through trial and error. Weeks turned into months, and his confidence grew. He wasn't the poor kid from the diner anymore. He was a student, a mechanic in training, someone with a purpose. One afternoon, his instructor called him aside. You've been recommended for a special project, he said. Mr. Wallace personally requested you. Ethan's heart jumped. Me? Are you sure? Quite sure, the instructor said with a smile. You'll be working with a small team to help restore one of the company's classic cars for an upcoming event. It's a big responsibility. Don't let it go to your head. Ethan couldn't stop smiling. That evening, he called his mother to tell her the news. She cried over the phone, proud and happy. See, she said through her tears. I told you this was your path. The project started the next week. The car they were restoring was an old model from the 1960s, one of the first ever built by Wallace Automotive. The engine was rusted, the paint faded, but there was history in every part of it. Ethan treated it with care, working late into the night to make sure every detail was right. His teammates respected him, even looked up to him. Slowly, he realized he wasn't the quiet outsider anymore. He was part of something bigger. One afternoon, Harold came to check on their progress. When he saw the car, his eyes softened. That was my first design, he said quietly. I built it with my own hands when I was 21. Seeing it here again, it brings back memories, Ethan smiled. We're going to make it shine again. Harold nodded, his gaze lingering on the car. I have no doubt you will. As the weeks went by, Ethan poured everything he had into the project. When they finally finished, the car looked like new, smooth silver paint, polished chrome, and an engine that purred like it had just rolled off the assembly line. The company held a small event to unveil the restored car. Employees, students, and even reporters were there. When Harold gave his speech, he spoke about hard work, perseverance, and the value of kindness. Then, to Ethan's shock, he called him up to the stage. This young man, Harold said, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder, is a reminder that the smallest act of compassion can lead to something extraordinary. He didn't help me because of who I was. He helped because it was the right thing to do. And that's the kind of person who changes the world, not with wealth, but with heart. The audience applauded, and Ethan felt his throat tighten. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, but in that moment, he felt something powerful. Validation, pride, and gratitude all at once. After the event, people came up to shake his hand, congratulating him. A few even asked about his future plans. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine it. Maybe one day designing engines, maybe teaching others like him. That night, when the crowd was gone and the lights were dim, Harold found him standing by the restored car, his hand resting gently on the hood. You did an incredible job, Harold said quietly. Thank you, Ethan replied. I just wanted to do it right. Harold smiled. You did more than that. You reminded me why I started all this in the first place. Ethan looked at him, puzzled. What do you mean? Harold's eyes softened. When people get older and success comes, it's easy to forget where they began. You made me remember that it's not about money or titles, it's about people. About doing something good even when no one's watching. Ethan didn't know what to say. He just smiled, humbled by the words. As Harold turned to leave, he said over his shoulder, You have a future here, Ethan. When you're ready, there will always be a place for you. Ethan stood there for a long time after he left, staring at the car glowing softly under the workshop lights. The boy who once walked home through the snow with torn shoes was now standing in the middle of a dream he didn't even know he had. And deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something far greater than he could ever imagine. Months turned into a year, and Ethan's life began to take on a new rhythm. He still woke up early every morning, still worked hard, and still carried the same quiet determination that had guided him since that freezing night. But now everything felt different. For the first time, he was no longer fighting against the world. He was walking with it. The scholarship allowed him to keep studying, and his job at the company gave him real experience. Every day he learned something new, not just about machines, but about people, responsibility, and patience. He often thought about how it had all begun, with a broken-down car on a cold road and a simple decision to help someone in need. It amazed him how one small act could change so much. Ethan was sitting in the workshop one late afternoon wiping grease from his hands when his phone buzzed. It was a message from his mother. Proud of you, son. Dad would be too, he smiled softly. His father had passed away when he was 12, but his mother often reminded him of how proud his father would be. It gave him strength, the kind that doesn't fade even in hard times. As he looked around the workshop, Ethan saw the life he had built. His tools, his drawings, his notes scattered across the desk. It wasn't much, but it was honest work, built on effort and kindness. He didn't need luxury. He only wanted purpose. A few weeks later, Harold invited Ethan to his office for a private meeting. Ethan walked in nervously, unsure what it was about. The office was elegant but warm, filled with photos and models of cars from different decades. On one shelf sat a small framed picture of a much younger Harold standing beside his first workshop. Come in, Ethan, Harold said, smiling. Sit down. Ethan did as he was told. You wanted to see me, sir? Yes. Harold leaned back in his chair. You've been with us for over a year now, and I've been watching your progress. You've done exceptionally well. Everyone speaks highly of your work and your attitude. Ethan felt his face warm. Thank you, sir. I just try to do my best. Harold nodded slowly. That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. You remind me of the kind of person this company was built for. Someone honest, hardworking, and not afraid to get his hands dirty. He paused for a moment, then continued. We're starting a new division. It's a research project focused on eco-friendly engines. I'd like you to be part of the team. Ethan's eyes widened. Me, really? Yes, you, Harold said with a small grin. You've earned it. You see things others miss. You don't just fix problems, you understand them. Ethan could barely find the words. I don't know what to say. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. I know you won't, Harold said kindly. You never have. That evening, as Ethan walked home, the air felt lighter. The city lights shimmered off the wet streets, and he couldn't help but smile. He remembered the days when he used to walk home in the cold, dreaming of a chance to change his life. Now that dream was his reality, but even with his success, Ethan never forgot where he came from. He still visited his old diner from time to time. The owner, a kind woman named Mrs. Howard, always greeted him with the same warm smile. Well, look who's here, she'd say, wiping her hands on her apron. The boy who used to wash dishes is now an engineer. Ethan would laugh and sit at the counter. Still your best customer, though. She'd pour him coffee and shake her head. You always were different. Most people just talk about helping others. You actually do it, Ethan smiled softly. Guess it just stuck with me. He also began volunteering at a local community garage on weekends, helping young students learn basic car repair. Many of them came from poor families just like he had. He wanted them to know that their situation didn't define them. That kindness, effort, and a good heart could open doors no one expected. One chilly Saturday, while Ethan was helping a boy replace a spark plug, Harold stopped by unannounced. The kids gathered around, whispering and pointing when they recognized him. Ethan looked up in surprise. "Mr. Wallace!" "I didn't expect to see you here," Harold smiled. "I was passing by and saw the sign. Thought I'd see what my best mechanic is up to on his day off." Ethan laughed. "Just trying to give back a little. These kids remind me of myself." Harold looked around the small garage, his eyes warm with pride. "You've done well, Ethan. You've taken every opportunity and turned it into something bigger." Ethan shrugged modestly. "You gave me that opportunity, sir. I just didn't want to waste it." Harold put a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't. You've inspired more people than you know." They talked for a while, and before leaving, Harold donated new tools and equipment to the garage, making the kids cheer with excitement. Ethan smiled as he watched them. It reminded him that goodness multiplies when shared. Years passed, and Ethan's name became known in the company. He designed several innovative systems, led projects, and even mentored younger engineers. But through it all, he stayed the same, humble, kind, and grateful. One afternoon, Harold invited Ethan to his home for dinner. It was a quiet, peaceful place on the edge of the city, surrounded by trees and open fields. Harold was older now, moving slower, but his eyes still carried the same spark. Over dinner, they talked not just about work, but about life. "You know," Harold said, stirring his tea, "when I first met you, I saw something special, but I never imagined you'd become such an important part of this company." Ethan smiled. "I just did what felt right."
"I didn't plan for any of this. That's exactly why it worked," Harold said softly.
"You did good because it was good, not because you wanted something in return. That kind of heart is rare." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the sound of wind rustling outside. Then Harold said quietly, "I'm getting older, Ethan. I've built my company, my fortune, and my legacy. But there's one thing I want to make sure of before I'm gone." Ethan frowned slightly. "What's that?" "That everything I've built goes into hands that understand its value, not just in money, but in people." Ethan blinked, not fully understanding. "You mean?" Harold smiled gently. "Yes, I want you to help lead this company one day. You've already earned the trust of everyone here. When I retire, I want you to carry it forward with honesty, compassion, and courage." Ethan was stunned. "Sir, I don't know if I can do that." "I'm not." Harold raised a hand. "You are. You've already proven it. You're not afraid to do what's right even when it's hard. That's what leadership means." Tears stung Ethan's eyes. "I don't even know what to say." "Then don't say anything," Harold said with a soft smile. "Just keep doing what you've always done. Believe in people." Years later, after Harold retired, Ethan stepped into a leadership role, guiding the company with the same honesty and humility that had defined his journey. Under his care, the business grew stronger, not just in numbers, but in spirit. He often visited schools, giving talks about kindness and perseverance. He told his story, about the freezing night, the broken car, and the stranger who turned out to be a billionaire. But he never told it to brag. He told it to remind others that compassion can change everything. One evening, after a long day, Ethan drove out to the same road where it had all begun. Snow was falling again, just like that night years ago. He parked his car and stepped out, breathing in the cold air. The world was quiet. Streetlights cast a soft glow on the snow-covered ground. He stood there for a long moment, thinking about how far he'd come. He smiled to himself and whispered, "Thank you." He didn't know if he was thanking Harold, his mother, or life itself, but maybe it didn't matter. A few minutes later, a small car passed by and stopped up ahead. The hood was open, steam rising into the air. A young man stepped out, shivering and looking worried. Ethan chuckled softly to himself. Fate had a strange sense of humor. He walked over, calling out, "Need a hand?" The boy looked up in relief. "Yes, please. I don't know what's wrong." Ethan rolled up his sleeves, smiling. "Let's take a look." And just like that, the circle completed itself. On that same lonely road, another story began, one built on kindness, warmth, and the simple truth that helping others is the richest reward of all.